Well, the first thing that we would like to have a chinwag about tonight is a discussion of where we're going in the future. And I can't remember where it came from, but I know there was a moment of inspiration, and I rapidly called Peter and said, "Hey, I've got an idea." And one of the reasons I do this is I'm going to die. Don't know when that's going to be. Based on the concentric circles on the back of my head, probably sooner rather than later. But it's what do you do with all the experience and the knowledge you've got? And one of the big frustrations I had when I was younger is finding mentors. And I had a great business mentor with a gentleman called Dick Proudfoot from America. I had a really good arborist mentor in terms of Alex Shigo. I had these people that I could draw on, mostly overseas, and that was difficult. In the earlier days, it wasn't uncommon for me to spend $1,000 or more during my month for the phone bills, because I'd be making phone calls overseas. So the thought that I had is perhaps it's time some of the older guys in the industry came in and spent time being a part of this and having it open up just to be broadly mentoring on anything within arboriculture, whether it be ethics, whether it be a problem with a disease. So to broaden it right out. And then the question was, do we do it once or twice a month? And that depends on the interest that we get and how it's shown. But I would suggest a second night in the month and on a different night, which is going to be something controversial, so that anyone who's got, for example, their regular AA meeting on a Monday night or the NA meeting or whatever they do on a Monday night, they're not disadvantaged. We would give them some alternate options there. I think that has some fairness to it. So the aim is to broaden this out and to see more oldies like me come along and get some different perspectives as well, but to look at answering those questions you have as an arborist. So if you were to work with somebody, you'd have that opportunity. A lot of us don't get that. A lot of us work in isolation. And it'd be interesting to see just a quick poll back to Peter, or an answer now with the yay or nay, who here has had that opportunity of working with somebody and getting all that experience, and how many of you have been like me where you've gone out, there's been very little internally within your organization, so you've had to go externally?
Yeah, well, me, obviously.
Yeah, I know you. Zach?
Hello. No, yeah, I've got some internal mentorship for sure where I'm working.
Yeah, so you have, that's great. Then that makes a big difference.
What do you want to say, Dominic?
I was just going to say, you and I, Mark, have a good friend in common, Steve Griffiths, down here in Canberra.
Yep.
So I've actually started working closely with him, helping him with his workload, and he's been quite open about it, also being a mentorship relationship. So I'm excited to learn a lot from that.
Yeah, and I think, even though Steve's got a fairly limited experience, it still makes it so much easier when you've got somebody else to say, this is what I do. Just to bounce an idea makes a huge difference. So the hope is, and I've already spoken to Adam Tom, who's those of you who don't know, Adam's a brilliant arborist from Queensland. I'm pretty sure that Marcus Lodge will be happy to join us. And, as we start to get, 10 or 15 of the older guys around that have had the experience, we'll hopefully have 2 or 3 of them on any night, so that if you ask a question, there's a group of us that can answer that and give you that different perspective. And then you're not relying on just one person's biases, because believe it or not, we all have biases. I know that if I had Scott Gatenby, there's another old fellow for you. If I had Scott Gatenby here, he would say, "Oh, don't go less than 12 times trunk diameter when you're getting near a tree, because if you do, the builders will take advantage of it and they'll end up at 2 times trunk diameter." Of course, my response is different, and that's good to hear both those responses. My response would be, it's the consent authority's responsibility to ensure that they enforce the conditions of consent. If they can't do their job, that's a sad indictment on them, not on me. Now, that's probably a little bit sarcastic back the other way, but it's that balancing process, and hearing the different views is important. So I think Anyone opposed to that as a concept? Anyone got anything to say about the concept?
I think that's a good idea.
So-
Like for me, I've got no one to ask. Like I'm on my own, so
Yeah,
all I get is these sort of seminars and webinars and meetings with the VTIO down in Victoria, and that's about it. Or whatever I can snap up reading and stuff like that.
and the other thing for me is, or Niels, is I often get phone calls, emails, most weeks, you know, all weird sort of things, and people want to know and answer something, and it really is time consuming. And I guess this gives me a chance to say, look, I can answer that. Give me a credit card, or come along to the mentor program, and a whole pile of us will volunteer our time to do it, and let everyone in the industry not just get the advantage of it at that moment in time, but because it's being recorded, get the advantage of that in the longer term. And you know, not that I object to the request to give, because as I said, in my days, I had mentors that gave graciously and generously. But there's got to be limits to that. And so this will help limit that in my end of the world, and also help other people get their benefit. Now, you know, if you need the answer straight away and you're happy to come along the following meeting and go through that process again, that's great. But, you know, today I got a phone call of all weird things from a lawyer who said, this is what's happening. This is where I'm standing. Where do I stand legally? I'm thinking, you know, this is not what. I mean, I spent half an hour on the phone to him because an arborist had asked that I do so. But again, his job is to do his job. Boy, we've got a lot of D's on tonight. I got D's and D's and D's.
Mark, just to clarify, are you talking about having these sessions in addition to our existing tips and law, or in?
No, I think it really is. You know, if we were all working in the one office together, we're all in the one company together. We are. We're in that company called Arbris in Australia and in the world. And now that company, somebody in that company wants to ask a question. This is our team meeting, and we're going to go through that. So I see it as a chance of dealing with tip still, because somebody will say, hey, I've got this disease issue and I'm not sure how to deal with it. We're going to deal with report writing still, because someone's going to say, how do I address this in a report? Or, you know, what sort of approach can I do with this? So all those things will still be covered. It's just, it'll be broadened out. If you say to me, well, you know, how do we deal with a client that doesn't want to pay? Well, I can tell you it's not tipping mulch and firewood on his driveway. Okay.
So just to clarify, you are talking about replacing the current tips and war with a new system.
Yeah, just a broader approach that isn't limited to a subject on the night.
Yeah.
The other thing, Peter, that's been discussed and it's been raised by ARBOZ is trying to come up with an indexing system. And I know there is software available that uses AI that allow us to do that. So you'll be able to potentially, if in agreement, have an index of the subjects in that particular mentor session, so that you can say, that's what I want to go hear something about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think another thing is that we've covered an awful lot of ground in the report writing, so that's probably getting to a saturation point.
That's right. That's exactly right, Rob. We have covered a lot of areas, and so we can either go back over those, or we can do something different. So I think this is a good way forward.
And again, no problems during a session if a new person coming along says, how do we deal with this? Where we can, and that's one of the advantages of indexing it, we can say, look, this has already been covered here, but let's briefly go over that. And if next mentor meet, you've still got questions, let's go over that in more detail then. So it does allow us to streamline things a bit. And the other thing is getting other things in. So we had some discussions with the Office of ARBOZ about potentially saying, look, you know, if you're a registered consulting arborist, and you've been one for 5 years, you probably should come along twice a year just to say hi and mentor and put your bid in. And if you're a newer registered consulting arborist, you probably should come along 5 times a year just to make sure that things are getting filled in. So making it not mandatory, but making it, and maybe it does need to be mandatory, but making it certainly encouraged that people are saying, yes, I've got involvement. Because the more people you've got putting in, the more people you've got asking questions, the more people you've got giving dissenting opinions. Again, diversity of opinion is really important in the process of horticulture. If it weren't, we'd be doing flush cuts, filling with concrete, and doing all those horrible things that I entered the industry when it was going on. It's just disgusting. We've become better because there are differences.
I think that we have broad agreement about this, Mark. So
that's great. That's what we'll head to, and I'm happy, content to in that direction.
I have sent you several questions about tips. Have you?
Yep, I've got them. So I'm just opening them up now. Lots and lots and lots and lots. Potential discussion topics I'll hold back because I don't think we're going to get through all of it all, but it's certainly there are things that we can come up with. But here's a great question, and it's one that Peter's asked. I don't know who for, but can trees access water in the water table? If not, why not? And if so, how would be the completion of that question. So what do you think? Can trees access the water in the water table?
Depends.
Can you say that again, Mark?
Can trees access water in a water table? In other words, if in lots of areas, particularly where there's shallower soils and rock, you'll have a flow zone just above the rock with water moving along. Can roots get access to that? How do they access it? So let's go back to the first one. I've got a willow growing beside a stream in Hornsby that I know quite well. It's got roots growing into the water. Okay? So clearly, depending on the plant, it's going to be able to potentially access even saturation, provided there's movement. If it gets stagnant, if the oxygen starts to disappear, then it requires some clever biochemistry. And some plants deal with that really well. For example, a lot of the Amazonian tree species that are flooded for 6 months of the year have to be able to get their oxygen to the roots in a different way. So there are those trees that are well adapted to be in a riparian zone or a river or wet zone. And it may be wet periodically. A lot of riparian zones for us in Australia are wet periodically. Some of them are wet more constantly. And so there are riverine species that, a Talisman viminalis, I've seen it growing in the middle of Grafton, the Grafton River. I mean, of all weird things, where there've been boulders and water flowing over the top of it, it would submerge in flood conditions. So that's one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is understanding water. And before he died, Alex was working on a book on water, which I have no idea where the manuscript is. I'd love to know, and maybe Judy Shogo does know. But one of the things to understand about water is it's a polar chemical. It's got this polarity. It's magnetic, so to speak, at a chemical level, not at or an atomic level, not as a, you can stick it onto something. And it's this ability to pull chemicals that makes it such a brilliant solvent. Water can move upwards, and we should know this if we've ever seen rising damp in a building where the water starts going up the brick wall. Okay, the smaller the particle, the more it will climb, because water is clingy. It really does want to hold on. So whilst it's saturated at a zone of the water table where you're getting permanent flow, above that will be moist because the water is moving upwards. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? So you're going to get access to it at varying degrees depending on what it is. Now, that sounds crazy, but I remember Phil Hadlington talking about this. And Peter, you and I might be the only two that can remember this. Septic systems went in, and the old, sewer systems went in, the old septic systems went out. And in the Northern Peninsula in particular, removing the septic tanks had a real impact on big old trees that had become, in inverted commas, dependent on the system. So they'd been, growing in that zone with water seeping out of the septic system constantly for decades. And then all of a sudden the water would, the tank would be dismantled, destroyed, and trees would die. So there's the two sides to it. So I think that's, my answer is yes, they can get access to it. How much they access will depend on how they handle water, whether, riparian species will do really well with it. Rainforest species, like riparian species, are used to saturation. So it's soil saturation that becomes the enemy.
Also, where I grew up, the water table was invariably salty.
And again, depending on the species as to how it will deal with that. And, we've talked about this before with Nissa about the water table in the Victorian New South Wales border, and how clearing has had an adverse effect on the saline contents come up to the surface, and salt's a whole different problem. But yes, plants are capable of grabbing that water and utilizing it, and can do so quite well depending on the species. I was going to say, Peter, some of our eucalypts are very tolerant to salt water. In fact, some of our eucalypts can be irrigated with straight ocean water, which I think is bloody amazing. You think about the versatility of what we've got in plant materials in the world, and it's pretty good.
Also, I know of a pandanus tree in Ocean Shores that's got its roots into a saltwater swimming pool.
And again, that makes sense. If pandanus couldn't cope with a certain amount of saline, you wouldn't see them there in those beachfront areas, right down in the surf zone. And we know that's the same thing for those of you who have traveled, coconuts, for example, in the tropical regions, where the water laps up sometimes a metre or two up the trunk during high tides. You really do get this variety of plant material. So yes, water table water is available, but it's not always the friend. So if you're talking about one of the arid region plants, or shallow sandstone, if you're in Australia, little rainfall, low levels of water, quick response, but not liking getting wet feet, they can have exactly the opposite effect. That is, too much water could be things, but they're not going to be getting their roots down to that area. And that raises that question again, and I know we've talked about it, but roots don't go looking for water. And I say that, and then I say, well, every time I say something, there's probably a bit of a lie there to simplify things down. And roots don't have noses, they don't have eyes, but they can respond to conditions. And one of the things they can do is they can take up water and redistribute it in the same root system. That is, they can take up water in one part during the night, move the water to the soil on the other side. And that allows them to continue to grow with the hope of finding a water pocket. So they're blindly seeking, they're not responding. When they hit an ideal concentration, they move. And we use that very method of irrigation in some of our horticultural production. And I know certainly in vineyards, it's called stress irrigation. And so rather than irrigating the entire root system of the vines, they irrigate, in the case of my sister's one, quadrants at a time. And the water is redistributed. I'm not saying that plants are intelligent, but boy, they are beautifully and almost perfectly evolved. So that's the answer to that question. A great question, Peter.
Thank you.
Next one. I'm going to have to share this, so I will. Just going to make sure I do it the right way. And share. Okay. You should see coming up in front of you a picture and an email.
Yep.
Now, this was sent by Niels, and it's fascinating. It looks maybe like a bit of Banksia or Grevillea.
Yeah, it's a Banksia.
Yeah, Banksia. What gives that away?
The colour, maybe,
The colour might.
and the things I don't know what they are.
These things here.
Yeah.
That's the remnants of rays. Okay, so your rays are going through the wood. Now I don't know whether I can. So here you can see it's not the clearest, but there's a ray here and a ray here and a ray here. Those rays are what we call multiseriate, and these are not just multiseriate, these are obscenely multiseriate. I've got some slides of samples of Proteaceae and some of the Quercus,
Brachychiton.
Brachychiton casuarina, where the multiseriate rays are so big, they run from the bottom to the top of the image when you're taking a photograph of it on a slide, microscope slide. They're just obscene. So that's what they are. And you've just had your bark, the ray went right through the bark. They've been damaged and they've desiccated very rapidly. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I sort of thought that's what it was, but for some reason I thought that was only on conifers or something.
No,
Non-flowering plant.
Uniseriate. So conifers only. There's no exceptions that I know of. There are some weird things in conifers, but well, okay. There's some occasions where you'll get a pair of rays together for a very short distance, but rays on, and then we're talking about radial parenchyma or the rays, medullary rays on Pinus or on gymnosperms is uniseriate, okay, which means one cell wide, and they're hard to see, and that's why we don't see the grain easily in those. We see the annual rings, but not the grain. It's interesting. It's exactly the same when it comes to most of our Myrtaceae. Our eucalypts tend to be uniseriate, and as a result, it's hard to see the grain in those, so you don't get to see it often. So that's why eucalyptus hasn't become this, wonderful furniture timber that people look at. Now, when you have these big multiseriate rays, one of the things you can do is quarter saw your timber. And, we don't want to be talking timber stuff because that talks destroying, but it's important to understand that if you slice that ray down, you've got all these parenchyma cells, and parenchyma has a cellulose cell wall, and cellulose has a high refractive index, so it reflects light off. That's what gives it its sheen. So when you see a beautiful silky oak cabinet and it looks spectacular, an oak cabinet and it looks spectacular, it's often because they've cortisol on it, and what you're seeing is the light being reflected back off it. It gives it this glistening appearance, and that's what makes it a great furniture timber. But it's the quartersawing. If you just mistreat the timber, you deserve to be flogged, and you won't get the benefits of it. Okay,
Yeah.
So the good old crafts people understood this, and when you can see a good piece of old, particularly if you get Niels, you get up around Queensland, there's a lot of old silky oak used in furnishings that they're just beautiful pieces.
There you go.
And nowadays, of course, we just use particle board. Okay, the next one you've got is a nice little tortured tree.
It's a coastal tea tree down at Wilson's Prom.
Yeah.
So all the older ones pretty much all look like that down there.
They do when they're grown overseas as well, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's just preferentially how they grow. And I think it's pretty neat to see. So
is there any rhyme or reason for why they choose to grow like that? Or
there is some logic to it, and that is if I gave you a lattice jib crane. Do you know what a lattice jib crane is? Everyone here does. You know those cranes on top of a frame that have big holes through them. Okay, that's a lattice jib crane. I said, look, beef this crane up but don't spend a lot of effort beefing it up, minimize the amount of materials, you'd make each of the lattices thicker. Okay. So and many trees do this. I mean, olive, for example, does the same thing, not to the same extent. Corumbia maculata, Corumbia citriodora, you'll see that same ribbing, what we describe as muscles developing. It's just simply the tree saying, where do I need to put down extra tissue? How do I do that? Flex your wood. And where's the best spot? Once you start on the system of saying, rather than a full circle, I'm going to put zones, crisscrosses. Once you've decided to be a lattice jib crane, you've got no choice. You've got to continue on being a lattice jib crane. So that will always stick with the plant. Why do they do it? I don't know. If you die before me, ask God, send me back the answer. Okay? I don't know the answer.
So, like, you think it's to save energy while growing or something?
Yeah, it's a carbon efficiency.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Zach. Are you there, Zach?
I'm here. Hello.
Okay, this is a picture you've sent in.
Yes.
See the pictures. Tell me the questions.
So it's a tree that's been condemned by the arborist before me.
Yep, go on.
And I can see there's a number of defects in the tree.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm just wondering where we sit with it.
Okay.
So I'm not worried about the basal cavity.
Well, why
necessarily.
aren't you worried about it so that everyone gets the benefit of that information?
You got good response growth there.
And an opening of less than 1/3 of the circumference.
Yep.
So, yeah, we just got a cavity. We've got a wound here.
So you have a wound in a tight union,
Yep.
which looks ugly.
It looks ugly. Yep. And this
And
gives
then
you
the tree's also been lion's tailed a number of times. So you've got these long overextended branches. So
and
then there's another cavity below the other union.
up here.
So the photo on the right there.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's the cavity just below the union. Yeah.
Look, where do you stand with it? The bottom line is, what part are you most? So Arb Australia produced minimum standard for risk assessment. So we follow that system through. What's the target, first of all?
So it's a campsite. So you got people with caravans and
Okay, so campsite.
and tents. Yep.
So it's people, and it's
Yep.
used all the time. I can tell that already.
Yeah. So it's probably weekends and public holidays.
So 10 weeks of the year.
Yep.
So we're down 1/5, and it's used half of the day.
Yep.
No one's at a campground for more than 12 hours in a day doing bits and pieces. 12 hours is pretty good. So, we've already got a limited amount of target exposure. What are we worried about failing? You get one choice and one choice only.
One of these is leaders. One of these stems.
Which one? You can't say one of these branches is going to fail. I want to know which one, because then I know whether I can cut it off or not.
Probably the one on the right.
So this one here, the big one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So if you took the perfect tree, and I'm just going to do this quantitatively, if you took the perfect tree, how likely would that branch be to fail if it had nothing there? Pretty small. Would we agree with that?
Yep.
And the worst one would be if that was actively cracking and you could hear it cracking, we'd say that was pretty close to a certainty. Of course, we've all seen them crack for a while and then stop. So those are our two extremes. So we benchmark those, and we can do this. We say that the average tree poses a risk of harm of less than 1 in 10 million. So something like this, if it was average with all the things going on, maybe 1 in a million chance of that limb failing. And at the crack, it's actively cracking. We're saying that's a 1 in 1 chance. It's pretty likely 1 in 1 to 1 in 10.
Sure.
Where would you say this tree fits, or that limb fits on that scale, with 1 being absolutely is, isolate the area, let's get everyone out. And 7 being there was nothing wrong with it. Where do you think this fits?
Um,
Can we
Yeah,
take a
that's-
vote?
yeah.
I would go closer to the 7 myself.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
What does everyone else think? Can we get us run it
Yeah.
around?
We can get
I'd love to see a pool test.
a pull test, okay, but without the pull test, just looking at it, you're just doing a quick walk around, and you're going to decide whether you need a pull test or not. So without the pull test, where do you think it stands? Closer to 1, closer to 7, or bang smacked it in the middle?
Quick,
Are we consider? Oh, sorry, Peter.
quick.
You say quick.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to ask: are we considering mitigation works yet in terms of pruning?
No, we do. The first thing we
Okay.
want to know, there's plenty of mitigation things we can do. The first
Yeah.
thing we want to know is, do we need to do anything?
If it's got good adaptive growth, then it's closer to a 7,
Okay, you're going 7.
I would think.
Closer to the 7 end, that's fine. So 7, he's saying, well, somewhere between 1 in 100,000 to 1 in a million, or somewhere closer to 1 in 10,000 to 1 in a million. So it's a fairly broad range still. So the problem
I'm leaning to 3.5.
a 3.5. Who said 3.5?
Yeah. With that, I want to see more information.
Yeah, okay, that's great.
But just from the photos, I'm thinking 3.5, 4.
Yeah, okay. So you're saying somewhere about bang smack in the middle.
What do you reckon?
About that.
What do I reckon? I reckon probably it's a 6.
I'm asking Rob. What? I'm interested to know what Rob reckons.
Rob?
I'd go closer to the 1, but I'd like to see a bit more of the tree and what the canopy's like and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay. So one of the things we know is that in general, arborists overestimate the risk significantly. There's the trees as standalone. So we really are prone to significantly overestimate risk. When we looked at the stuff for the schools in New South Wales, we figured on average an arborist overestimates the level of risk by just a small amount of 10,000 times.
But I just want, the reason that I'm asking for a bit of a quick poll here is that I think
Averages get there.
I think that it's important to realise exactly what we're doing here. We're only benchmarking this. Once we've benchmarked it, then we can go on to the further investigation if we think it's necessary. But I think I get the feeling that people are trying to jump a couple of steps ahead rather than just doing the basic benchmark. Do I think it's good or do I think it's bad? And then we can go from there.
So again, depending on how you rate it, but I think we ended up with things from Robert 1. Rob, you did say 1, didn't you? Closer to 1. Yeah, closer to 1. I mean, we averaged it out. We're probably going to come out somewhere around about 4 or 5 if we went through the group. And you know, that's 100 times higher than where it needs to be probably, but that's fine. That's a great starting point. So we've got a 4 or a 5. Then we can ask the next question. This is Melaleuca what? Or is it Callistemon?
Melaleuca quinquenevia.
Quinquenevia. How many Melaleuca quinquenevias have you seen with inclusions?
Nearly every one.
Nearly every one. Yeah. So with that little bit of information, why are these different than normal quinquenevias?
I guess it's the tight union.
Sorry, say that again, Zach.
It's sort of the look of the union. It looks, I don't know, narrower than others.
Yeah, okay. So
And
it's
then
not.
It's the way it's been pruned as well. So you've got all this end weight. Because all the lower branches have been removed, it looks particularly bad.
Yeah. Now, lines tailing or the stripping of the foliage upwards means that these branches are more likely to fail up here and less likely to fail down here.
How's that?
It's because lines tailing results. Think of lines tailing as having a fishing rod. We go up with a fishing rod, lovely material, and I'm catching a fish and everything's fine. I get it in and it's done. The same fish, take my fishing rod, and 3/4 of the way up, I'm going to strap a garden stake to it all the way down and tighten it up. What's going to happen at the point that I've made it too rigid? It's going to have a failure point. And so what happens is when we lion's tail, we change all of this from dynamic to static, this lower portion. And so this is not moving the way it should. This is not doing it. And you all know this is a case. If you get a sapling, then you tried to catch cicadas as a kid. And you went out and you grabbed a sapling and you start to pull on it. And as you're pulling the sapling over, you'd hear it go clunk. And you think, uh-oh. And you say to your mates, hey, come on, give me a hand. And they would then get their hands and reach up and grab a branch. And eventually you could have the top on the ground, even though in that process of your initial pulling, you've even had an impact and you've probably given a minor crack on the internal side of it. It's because if we spread the load more evenly, the pull point more evenly over that tree, it's got a lot of flexibility. Okay. Now, the other thing is to keep in mind that wood, typically, the tree becomes more rigid and less flexible the older it gets. And again, we know this. You try bending a young branch and you can often bend it to a semicircle. You get a piece of wood, that's maybe 25 mils in diameter and try bending it to a semicircle and it cracks. So when we lion's tail, the real issue is we're increasing the failure from a pointer around the zone where the rigid meets the flexible.
Rather than at the union, is what you're saying?
Rather than at the unions, yeah.
Okay.
We've got reduced load at the union.
Right.
Hey, Mark, what's the point where the flexible wood meets the solid wood? What's that?
It's not
That's
a
called
point.
something, isn't it? Say again?
It's not a point, but yes, I don't know what it's called, Niels.
I can't remember.
What was the question?
What's the name of the zone at which the more rigid material meets the more flexible point? And the answer is the failure point.
Are you talking about the modulus of elasticity? How much something can deform without being completely deformed?
Yeah, but there's a transition that goes quite rapidly when you prune up like this and you're taking away the flexibility of the lower portion. The top bit still moves, but the bottom bit doesn't move as much. And so that's just like grabbing that young sapling and pulling from the end and having the top break out. And that was one of the criticisms that Duncan Slater made of testing included junctions and junctions with angles of attachment that are tighter than 25 degrees. He said, when you think about it, we did it all in a laboratory and we tested. We said, let's get a tight union. Let's put a sling on it right at the union and let's pull. But when you do that, of course, you're not doing what a tree does. A tree flexes. So if you try grabbing at the end and pulling off, and you'll break the branches. And that's what we see in storms. Frequently see in storms trees with co-dominant stems that haven't failed. The vast majority do not fail. A small proportion fail. So yeah, look, and again, I'm happy for a difference of opinion on the risk. My view of it is if you're in a campground and a microburst or a severe storm is about to hit and you're hiding underneath the protection of a tree, you're an idiot and you need to die. We need you out of the genome. But apart from that, all other bets are off. I don't think that most trees fail unless they've got something really obvious during most conditions. I mean, this tree's been through a storm or two before, I'm assuming.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. By the looks of it, probably 20 or 30 of them. So could it fail again? Yes. And that's the next bit. If it fails, how do included junctions tend to fail if they fail at the union?
They don't just split off and fall immediately, jump off the tree like a sudden branch drop failure.
Yeah.
They crack and bend down.
So a lot of the energy is absorbed by the tree itself still. So is it going to be perfect? No, but it's still something to keep in mind. So we've got a target that's there a portion of the time. We've got a part that's likely to fail, and how big's that part?
A few hundred mil.
200 mils. Okay, so I'm just going to use a QTRA calculator because I'm a slacko. We'll do this. It's going to hate me, but that's okay.
And you can, whereas I don't have a PC, so I can't actually use the QTRA app. Think we've lost Mark. I'll see. Can't hear you, Mark.
And I'll take away the see me bit, and that'll make life a lot easier. Okay. So here we are with the QTRA calculator. Can everyone see that? Okay,
Yeah.
great. We're saying occupation, 2.4 hours a day maximum. Why? Because they're not there all the time. Yep. Size of the part, we said it was about 200 mils in diameter. Probability of failure, I said, was somewhere around about the 4 to the 5 mark. If we averaged it all out, let's stay at 4. That's 1 in 500,000. The question is that an unreasonable risk? Now, I know what you're saying. It poses a risk, and it's an elevated risk. And if I were to do a track assessment, so let's do with track, the occupation, if you follow track's ordinals, is occasional. Then the likelihood of something failing would be possible. So possible and occasional gives us a likelihood of impact as medium, possible and medium. Unlikely, if I take unlikely and I take the worst case incidence of severe, the track comes out as low. Okay. I never went through the same process with David Evans. Would come with valid. Would come back to the same basic end of the world. I don't have enough time to press that many buttons. So here we are, 1 in 500,000. What would you do? The answer is it's posing a risk of about $10 a year in potential harm. If we put that over 10 years, that's $100. What could you do to this tree for $100? What would you do to this tree for $100?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Mulch it.
Yeah, give it some water. So it's probably already, of greater value than the risk. It's posing $10 a year of risk above the threshold that we're bound to in New South Wales and every other state except Victoria under the Work Health and Safety Act. So that's not a particularly high risk.
Without doing the calculation, I would guess that it was providing more than $10 of value per year.
absolutely is providing a lot more than $10 worth of value per year. So the tree is posing more of a value than a liability. We do a cost benefit analysis, then the deal's over. But we all work for somebody who's a pain in the neck, who's worried about something. There's a little old biddy down the road that's complaining. Somebody's writing a letter to a minister. And so we may have to address this issue. So let's go back to our tree, stop sharing, and go back to our tree and say, okay, what else could we do? What could we do with this tree?
Well, you could do a very slight reduction prune to reduce the weight and therefore the lever arm on the branch that's overhanging the camping spot.
Could do, but I'm going to give two provisos here. It's already been over pruned, and most arborists can't do reduction pruning for their life to be safe because we don't do enough of it. And I'm certainly in that category. Every time I look at a reduction prune, I think, there are a few arborists that do nothing almost but reduction pruning. A lot of them have been trained overseas, and they just do amazing work. I don't claim to be anywhere near that capacity.
No,
I could do that. I could put just catcher in it. I could put a piece of rope in it, tie a good rethreaded figure of 8 up on either side of the union, so that it can't go too far and fail. I bet you some of you have got a piece of rope that you've cut off your climb line at some stage or other that would be suitable for that. So there's a simple, $80 solution, plus the cost of getting the arborist out there to do it. So that's now $480 solution for a $10 problem. It's a difficult one, isn't it?
I think that the issue with putting that sort of infrastructure in the tree is that it's got a limited life as well, so that you would be kind of agreeing to deal with it at the end of that rope's
Absolutely.
life.
Absolutely. We would have to come back and address it, hopefully after the tree's had a little bit more time to deal with the fact that it's been beaten around a bit. Typically, if I see a tree that's been over pruned, my general recommendations are no change of any structural issue with the tree for the next 5 years. Don't prune. If something breaks, by all means, fix it, but don't go amending the canopy. I want the tree to have time to get blown around in a few storms, thicken up, respond, and adjust. I could put a bolt in if I really was concerned. I could put a rod through. There's 100 things we could do. But for the level of risk, I probably wouldn't. But reduction pruning would be fine if it hadn't been pruned around so much. From my view, again, I know there are guys out there who will almost prune a tree to death, and the tree still keeps on going quite happily for decades. And, a good example of that, for example, is trees under power lines. Sometimes you've got to wonder how they managed to get away with it. So, yeah, look, what would I do about it? I wouldn't worry about it. But I understand someone being concerned about it. The reason I wouldn't worry about it is in almost all cases, and I just gave a presentation of this a couple of weeks ago, if the tree's healthy and it's not actively failing, in almost all cases, the benefits given by the tree exceed the risk associated with the tree. So in almost all cases, yes, Dominic.
I was just going to say, I really like your train of thoughts and where you're going with this, but just a good perspective to also keep in mind is that if we start talking about cost-benefit analysis and level of risk, your most domestic client, that's just going to go over their head and they want a fairly simple answer. In this situation, you say like cable bracing or something of that sort, $500 for a $10 problem, maybe that's what the client wants to simply feel better.
Oh, look, I agree with that. And my general comments to clients, it's almost always my starting point is, let's be clear here. In Australia each year, about 5 people are killed by trees on average. Okay. That compares favorably with the 50 odd that are killed by beds. Now, I don't know what the name of the profession is that does bed inspections to make sure that people don't fall on them or from them. But there's a whole industry that's worth over $500 million a year sold on something that's a risk that is small as that. Whilst you drive to that site to look at it, and the risk of dying in a car accident in Australia is around 1 in 20,000. It's absurd. It's irrational. More people are killed by Australia's most deadly animal. And everyone knows what that is, don't you?
Yeah, horses.
Horses. Yep, not crocodiles, not snakes, not spiders, not
Well,
all the snakes collectively.
That's warm-blooded animals, not mosquitoes.
No, in Australia, mosquitoes kill very few. Overseas, mosquitoes kill more. We don't have malaria, thank goodness. But yes, I mean, you know, we just don't think about how incredibly small the risk from trees is. And that's one of the problems when we use a qualitative system. So when we say the risk is high, medium or low, when I say the risk is low, someone says, well, the risk is low, we can make it lower. What can we do to make it lower? And then we just keep on piling on the things to be done to a tree.
My view is that one of the reasons that we overestimate the risk from trees is that it's obvious. If you've got a nice, friendly horse walking around, you don't immediately think, oh, this is a very dangerous creature. Whereas if you've got a branch waving around above your head, then people can see it and they can worry about it.
Yeah, they can. But what makes this branch? What makes this Melaleuca quinquenervia substantially different from the thousands of others that are in high use areas? And we use them as street trees in the middle of Sydney. They, you know, yes, they occasionally fail. But that's a rarity, not the norm. I mean, I think about the average Melaleuca quinquenervia for us in Sydney, and it would have 10 or 15 stems that are all included. And the street with 50 of those trees. And those trees, you don't see a recorded failure in the street. You think, well, you know, where do I stop worrying about it? So as I said, for me, I would just look at that and say, no, it's a nice tree. That's not sufficient. If I was walking around the school, I wouldn't even record it. I do take the comment, and I think it's important to be aware that camping grounds are unique. And camping grounds are unique because people spend more time in a camping ground than lots of other areas in a structure that's often not designed to have anyone even sit on it. Okay, so tents do not provide a lot of protection. Caravans provide minimal protection. They're made to be lightweight and mobile, not to be impact resistant. They're made to be watertight and stable under towing, but they're not made to have something hit it. And the car's the same. You know, we look at the number of deaths from people in Australia. People driving cars is a reasonable group. People out recreating and camping is a reasonable group. So my one message to this camping ground owner would be, if you are getting a severe thunderstorm warning where a microburst is likely to occur, alert people and have them be in areas away from where trees may fall. That's the only thing. And those storms they'll go through, you'll see the peak of the storm and where the area where the microburst is likely to hit, that sort of area will go through in 15 minutes, half an hour. So it just means 15 minutes for half an hour. Go have a shower in the ablution block. Actually, don't do that because you could get a lightning strike. But you know what I'm saying. Go have a crap on the toilet. You know, don't be hiding in your tent waiting to see whether something falls. And without question, I think that's a far better use of money than trying to do anything else to address this problem. But if at the end of it all, somebody said, look, I'm not happy with that, I want to remove it, that's fine. Let me go the devil's advocate for the next part then. what are we going to replace it with? What are we going to try and replace? A tree, the canopy, or the biomass? And then what's a reasonable time to do that in? My guesstimate is if you wanted to replace that with new Melaleucas, you'd probably have to go and plant, if you want the biomass back in 5 years, you'd probably have to plant 50 or 100. And I'm not going to answer either way, but if we are of the view that global warming is an issue, then carbon sequestration is a vital part of the equation. This remove one tree with lots of carbon biomass and putting in a little tree with almost no carbon biomass is madness. It just doesn't work. Happy with that?
That's great. Thank you.
Again, you know, happy with the end decisions removal. Just got to put that into context. So here's a tree risk assessment. I'll have to open it and share separately because it's a PDF file. So I'll stop sharing. And then Niels, this is yours. And I get to share this one. If I go share, Windows. So some feedback. First thing is really clear. There's a nice title page, who you prepared it for, the address, some details. I think that's fundamentally sound. I have no style. You can see that with the way I dress and present myself. So I don't care about colors and all those things, but we're getting some information presented. There's a table of contents that's been produced using software rather than manually filled in, and I think that's a great way to be. You know, that's the standard that we'd expect. By the way, Niels, there is a process for redacting your text using Word. If you want, you just black it out. You put a black highlighter through.
I didn't think of that.
That's okay. It just takes time to do it the other way. So you've gone through and you've assessed the trees. How have we assessed them?
Just a VTA. Probably might
yeah.
not say there on the executive summary, but yeah, just visually.
You've assessed them visually, but how do you assess the risk? Or how do you rank or rate the risk? What method did you use?
Yeah, so I used QTRA, and yeah, I sort of struggle a little bit with the target aspect of it. It's hard to sort of know for me or calculate, you know, what the occupation really is. So it's sort of
look again, and
generalize.
That's normal. It might help you just as a general rule to know that schools are occupied, and I've done this so many times now, schools are occupied about 15% of the year.
Yep.
Okay. It sounds horrible. Universities are occupied even less. So in terms of en masse, universities are open longer, but students are there for a very small portion in comparison. So we take an average school and we say, look, it's XYZ school. It's open for 15% of the time. What proportion of the time are the students outside?
What, an hour a day tops?
Yeah, and depending on the school, most of them require in the younger years them to spend some of that is controlled. So an hour out of how often are they in the school? 6 hours in the day. That's 1/6. That's 1/15th, 1/15th, or 1/15th. I don't want to go do the math for you, but it's 200 and something or other. So it's starting to get a small proportion of the day they're outside. Now, if I take
2.25%.
sorry,
I did the calculation. Yeah, 2.25%.
yeah, 225. That's right. So that's a very small amount of time they're out. Now, they're in a school grounds. Let's say that it's got 5,000 square meters of area that they're allowed to play in, and they've got 500 students, you can pretty well calculate they're going to be occupying just on random movements a fairly small proportion of the time. The likelihood that there's going to be somebody standing underneath a tree 10% of the time is almost zero.
Yeah.
Yep. So that's the part of it. If you're using Tutor, the training says, what's the failure likely to be during times when, or what's the occupation likely to be when failure is likely to occur? So during a storm event, during rain, during severe winds, in most schools, the answer will be almost zero.
Yep.
Okay. And you don't have to do much of school inspections. Go out on a wet day with an umbrella and find what the COLA is. Covered Outdoor Learning Area, COLA. And that's where they'll be. As soon as it starts to rain, that and in classrooms, if you're talking about junior years, you know, a primary school or a public school, often those children are asked to stay in the classrooms on a wet day, eat their lunches indoors, and they don't get to go out and play. So, but that's how I'd handle occupation rates. So you can do it mathematically. Brief, that's great. You've been said what you've got to do. How you collected the method, you did a VTA, and then you've said here, recording the VTA risk assessment, I did by a spreadsheet, and you did that for every tree, I'm assuming.
Yeah, there's just one big spreadsheet.
Yeah, I'm
and then
lazy,
you've just, yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with what you've done, but I would say, what was the worst tree? If you're asked what was the worst tree, what were the worst trees? And you've already told me up here, the worst two trees.
Not really any of them, but
Well, the worst two, because you've
yeah.
got two here, 19 and 23.
Yeah. But they didn't have to do anything with risk mitigation. That was just general maintenance or management work.
Okay. And look, that's what you would expect. I mean, I came up with a school the other day that I looked at it and I said, I don't know what the fungus is. I don't know what's happening at the cavity. There's lots of sporocarps. You know, fortunately, the tree had been reduced before, and it was a really nice reduction job on a eucalypt. And I said, that almost compensates for what I'm seeing, but I still want to know more. You know, I'm having difficulties asking for an area inspection because I know it's going to cost them by the time they finish probably $600 or $700 to get somebody in and go and inspect, and then we've got a sample to send off for diagnosis, and that'll be a DNA because it's fungi. You know, probably spend maybe $1,000 by the time we're finished for a tree that poses a risk that is probably 1 in 400,000. You know, it's disproportionate.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, what I would have done is if you'd found a tree that you thought was worse, and let's say it was one of those two trees, I'd just do the QTAR on that if you had to.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. Thinking back at it, I probably didn't need to do any risk calculations, but I also didn't know where I was sitting with everything. So
that's perfectly reasonable answer is that there was no indicia present, or there was nothing that indicated that any of the trees posed a significantly elevated risk from that of the average tree. The average tree poses a risk of harm at around 1 in 10 million. Therefore, there's no reason to believe that any of these trees provide anything but a broadly acceptable risk using the tolerability framework jargon.
Yeah.
So that's a perfectly good thing to say. There's nothing there that, you know, yeah, look, there's some dead branches. Oh, yep, look, there's a cavity. You know, I know it drives people crazy when I say there's the dead branch, there's cavity. You know, there's a hanger in the tree. And yeah, the risk associated with the tree is fine. They say, well, what? You know, all those defects.
I do like the idea of choosing the tree that you think is the most likely to cause harm and do an assessment on that tree. And then you can actually gone through the process and here's the result rather than just relying on logic.
Yeah, look, you get to the point where you look at it and you do the calculations in your head and you say, what the hell am I doing? spending that sort of time and effort on it.
It's more to assure that the client that you've gone through, and to show the client that there is this process and that you've gone through it, and there's the answer for the most dangerous tree, and it's acceptable. So I find it helps to step them through your thinking.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair comment in some situations, Peter. It's just again, the first thing that I see then is you say, oh, tree 23 was the tree that posed the greatest risk. And I know that I deal with asset people that would say, then tree 23 has to go. You know, because
Well, in that case, they're just not simply reading the report, because you've chosen that to do a risk assessment of that tree, and you've shown that it has an acceptable risk. If they read that and decide that it has to go, then what can you do? You can't help stupid people.
oh no, look, but understand, you've got to be aware, and I think we all are, that there are lots of parts of society that are very much afraid of trees. And I don't know whether it's an irrational fear. But yeah, you've done a layout, you've put some numbers down, we know where you're talking about. You've given them a whole pile of, as you say, information and data. When you've done your QTRA, you've calculated it.
Yeah, that spreadsheet calculates it for you when you put it in the spreadsheet, and then I just double checked it with the calculator app
So
or
what
the website.
if I was running a piece of software, and I can share it with you, it's the easiest way. Maybe I can't. Maybe I don't have a school in progress at the moment. When I'm doing a QTRA assessment, I'll always state, if I'm saying a tree 24, I'll say what the concern is. So I'm concerned about long branch over, then the target, how frequent's the target there, size of the part and the likelihood of failure. So I express all the elements so that anyone can check and verify or falsify. By falsify doesn't mean, it's a scientific term, doesn't mean, it means that someone can go through and say, hey, this is clearly wrong.
So you've got all the numbers there on the far right. So you should be able to relate to size and occupation.
So
on the one, if you go further right, down the bottom of that page, you've got.
This,
so that's the calculations, but I haven't gone in depth on targets.
That's fine. So for one of those trees, that's where I would, if I was going to do one, I'd always make sure I've disclosed, and certainly nowadays, more so than what I would have done when I was younger, I always want to tell them what the assumptions are that I'm making. So I'm assuming that the risk from this tree is from a branch that's overextended, falling onto the path, onto a student, okay? And then I'd give the logic for the occupation rate. Occupation rate's been assumed during inclement weather. It's the only access point in and out, and therefore I'm assuming that we will have two movements of the students, one in and one out. There's 100 students, there's 200 movements in a day. They'll take 5 seconds each. That's 1,000 seconds in a day, and then that's that proportion of the year times 200. And so I'd explain that. I want to try and make sure that my reader can show me that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
It sounds crazy to say that, but that's how you make sure that you don't get things wrong, in that someone can come along and say, hey, Mark, have a look at that number. Now, there was a really weird event. We talked about it once before, Layman Street, over $1 million spent between the council and the local residents fighting over these trees before any tree work was done. And somebody had figured out that the occupation rate under those trees was something like 1 in 20. But in reality, it wasn't, because when the Pasha Bulk storm came through, almost nobody went along the street. So in conditions when failure was likely to occur, people weren't there. And so that's what we've got to think through. We've got to just talk through what assumptions we're making. Does it mean that it can't fail on a normal day? No, but then I've given the parameters that I'm looking at. Happy with that?
Mm.
So, but
Yeah.
look, great. You've given the information, and it's probably more than what I do with a risk assessment, because I just cannot tolerate the process of putting numbers all on every tree and collecting all that data. For me, that's hard work. And I've got 100 people wanting other things done. So for me, is there a tree on the school grounds that's got a problem? Yep. Are there trees that need some maintenance work? Yep. Let's list those down. Significant maintenance work. I don't care if you've got a 5 mil dead branch or a 10 mil dead branch, but I do care if you've got a 150 mil dead branch, on the edge of the play area. That's probably something I'm going to mention. And the bulk I'm not going to even worry about.
So you'd only
And how do you navigate?
mention you'd only mention the trees that would need some sort of maintenance or
Depending on what
sort
the
of
risk is.
because I've got a few in there that says NA on on comments there, which there was nothing to it, and I didn't even take a picture of it.
There's nothing wrong with having that information in an inventory, but that's an inventory. And the only value of that for you or for your client is if they had enough data that they could do statistical analysis of it. And so it's a fairly limited value. But some people really like it. Some people want that, and that's great. I don't have any qualms with the client's desires or wishes. I have a preference. If they tell me that they want that done, I'm going to tell them it's going to cost them a lot more than doing a risk assessment. I can walk through an average school and do an assessment of every tree in probably an hour to an hour and a half on average. Some schools less. Zach, you had a question.
Yeah, so I was wondering how you navigate that with the client. If they're happy with you only looking at a few trees and then writing about that.
Oh, look, with schools, it's a breeze. Took me 10 years to figure out how, but I say it like this now. Zach, if I were to ask you to do a report on the bad students in the school, would you give me a whole pile of information about the 95% of the students that are good? Or are you going to give me a report about the 5% that are bad? If you're a bureaucrat and you like wasting money, you're going to tell me about every student. Okay. If you're a principal or a deputy principal and you're busy, you'll worry about the bad students, and the rest really don't matter in the report. And that's the way I handle it with the school. You can collect a whole pile of useful information from a school, like the brand of their underwear. You could collect that. The size of their shoes. You could collect that. It would be all great stuff. At some stage or other, somebody, after collecting 1 million pieces of shoe sizes and things, may come up with a correlation between shoe size and performance at school. And that may be useful. But boy, in the meantime, what a waste of 1 million pieces of data. There's got to be something that makes you want to collect that information. Now, if you were talking about a council, for example, I get why a council may want to know how a particular species is performing. But I would hope that the arborist in that council, driving around the streets on a regular basis, could do that almost intuitively rather than having a data set. You may want to verify it or falsify it, that process again, by saying, let's take 10 streets and go look and see whether my gut level feeling is right. But to data collect all that information and then to go and do it all again in 3 years' time, and then to do it all again in 3 years' time, and then to do it all again in 3 years' time, it seems absurd. Now, Craig Hallam and Craig Hinton and do a lot of this stuff. And Craig Hinton will tell you the stuff that he wonders why they collect the data on, like useful life expectancy. I'm constantly embarrassed about my ineptitudes. I went out to a school the other day and the tree's looking great. It's a Crimbia maculata. It had less than 1% canopy. I got a photograph of it. It should have died. The damn thing's coming back. Okay. And then another perfectly good tree is dead. Where the hell did I get it all wrong? So useful life expectancy may not be a great tool, it's a decision-making tool on a development site, but it's not a tool for managing broad area trees. Height, probably not relevant for most council situations. And if you want it, rather than collecting dimensions like that, LiDAR now has just usurped that whole role. Sydney's done on a regular basis with LiDAR. And I can say, look, from the LiDAR data, find me trees that are between 15 and 18 meters high, and it'll give me that information. So rather than getting a person to do it, you can have, does everyone know what LiDAR is? No, Rob? It's using light as a radar component. So it's sending down light and letting it bounce off. And it can measure the height of things fairly accurately and really quickly, huge amounts of data. So, you can do my suburb and probably have my suburb done in 5-10 minutes. And at way less cost than getting an arborist to do it. It'll calculate canopy area of trees 6 meters and above, and it can do that, as a calculation in just seconds. So I think, a lot of the stuff that we might have had some benefit to collecting 10 years ago or 15 years ago is now becoming rapidly redundant. The one piece of information I will say forever, the one most useful piece of information that you could have recorded on that, Niels, that you didn't record, is where we could plant trees. And I bet you on that school we could get away with 200 or 300 of them. And that bit is missing. And that's the same with the streets. And I know my local council, and I'm in one of the poorest areas of Sydney in Blacktown Council. I know my local arborists like to record down planting spots in the street. That's a critical thing for them. It's more critical to get trees in and get them properly established. So don't just plonk them in and forget about them, but get them established, than it is to manage what we've got there in other ways. So to go out and say, oh, yes, look, and I say that Blacktown Council has thousands of maintenance items that they haven't done. Dominic, go ahead. Yeah, take your microphone off. Turn your microphone, Dominic Gray.
Yes, just back to the tree risk assessment report about talking about what trees to mention and where is the line for how much information, where's the line between relevant and irrelevant information depending on your client. I'm doing my track training in Sydney in early August, but just in general, like, how often do people ask their clients when doing a tree risk assessment what their minimum or what their acceptable risk threshold is? Because that would help you then figure out, okay, well, that would give you quite a clear line of anything above that they want to know about, or anything close to and above they want to know. Anything that's not anywhere near it, we'll worry about that next time.
That's a great question. Generally, I am not so obliging. I'm usually telling my clients, look, let's just follow common sense here. We don't want it to be higher than the risk associated with the car. Most people agree with that.
Yeah.
Most people don't realize where cars sit in the spectrum. And then when you tell them that beds, and I won't talk about stairs. We've taken stairs out of the equation because Alex Shago died falling down his stairs. Okay. Stairs are just lethal. And I see them in all sorts of places. I mean, nearly every house I visit has got stairs. They've got cars. They've got all these weird and wonderful things. Some of them have got dogs. I'm wondering whether I should go out and do risk assessments. Got to drive a car. Got to get up the stairs, walk on uneven surfaces. So I'm being tongue-in-cheekish, of course, but generally my answer, Dominic, is I try and communicate to the client where we feel. If I ask them what they think is acceptable, the answer is no risk, zero risk. The number of times I hear people say, I don't want any risk, and that's horrible for me because I only know one way of achieving that. And that means you've got to let me kill you.
Essentially.
Yeah, you can get rid of risk because all of your life is spent with one primary risk, and that is how you're going to die. And so only when you're dead does the risk disappear. So I don't really want to kill you. And look, I get it all the time. As the branch failure one is one that I do get. You know, we just had a big branch fail in school, and I say, yeah, you should have. If I've assessed risk correctly, branches should fail. Occasionally, a tree should come down. You know, property damage should occur on occasions. Rarely will anyone get hit. Almost never will anyone get killed. But if you want it statistically, I can give it to you. The likelihood at this stage of being killed in a school in New South Wales with 780-something thousand students is once in every 43 years. That's what we should expect. Well, hang on a second. In New South Wales, we had Bridget Wright die. That's it. She's our statistical norm.
I do get that. Asking, I like you said, I wouldn't be asking homeowners what's your minimum risk threshold for your property. I do get that is more of a, I guess, a commercial question. But I was just curious, just in general, how often arborists ask that.
Yeah, I don't think we ask very often at all. I think we try and educate. But Nisse, for example, is out in Nyngan at the moment. And I spent some time with the general manager in Nyngan asking these questions on one occasion. We sat down under a tree that had been cut roots on 3 sides and felt nice and relaxed. And I said to him, you know, let's have a look. What do you really want? If the risk was as high as driving a car, would you want to do something about it? He said, well, no, that's acceptable. I said, well, great. Let me tell you where trees start off at 1 in 5 million. Like, you know, a 1 in 20,000 trees, something that generally I'd have most people doing something about. And that's 1 in 20,000. Why? Because we accept the risk from trees for the benefits they give us. We accept the risk from driving for the benefit that gives us. And for the record, if we didn't have cars and we had to use horses, the mortality rate would be substantially higher. Okay, we know that horses are dangerous. Okay, without being silly.
Today's population is much less educated around horses, though.
Back then they were too. I mean, people were a lot better horsemen back 100 years ago, and yet it was a common cause. In fact, New York City reports about major pollution and major accidents and incidents when they were a horse and cart with horse manure piling up in some spots 3 stories high. Now we've got cars, we complain about accidents and all the pollution. It just seems to be a side effect of consuming energy to move people around. But look, I think it's all very well to have a discussion with a client, but it's also important that we educate them. So I think, you know, and I have a whole pile of that stuff already pre-prepared in that educational process, right down to that question, you know, why should we not have an inventory? I have a standard set of inserts for that. I've got a standard set of inserts for hundreds and hundreds of scenarios, just because over the years. So when I say standard insert, you write something, you craft it, you revise it, you think about it, it communicates well, you revise it, you keep on going, and then you start storing that in a file. Okay, and for me, I use Word, so it's in a Word file. And so I click on that Word file in schools. It's called School Inserts. And I have, you know, probably 150 odd standard things that I might want to communicate that I can just grab quickly. So why have I recorded the tree with a cavity? I'm not worried about cavities. They seldom fail. I'm recording it simply to facilitate monitoring. That's all. So next year I can look at it and find it a lot quicker and a lot easier than having to go through and, you know, walking around. I know it's there.
And besides cavities, what other trees will you look at?
Trees that are actively failing, they're rare. Trees with actively failing, so I'll define that. Cracking, rocking in the ground with a fruiting body or a presence of a decay organism that's causing rapid deterioration of the tissue. So an example of that would be Eucalyptus nicolai has just died. Eucalyptus nicolai in Sydney decays very rapidly. It's got very low durability. In 2 years or 3 years, you'll be able to start thinking about pushing it over. So that for me would be a rapidly declining or actively declining tree. What else? What other things? A crack in the branch. Transverse fractures. One of the worst. But overlong branches we now know is not an issue. Clustered branches we know now is not an issue. Tight angle of attachment we know not an issue. Actively failing forks, I would say, would be the number one thing, Zach, that I find where I need to activate something within a short time frame. So a crack that's recently occurred with no active growth, or where there's those pursed lips. I think everyone should know what I mean when I say pursed lips, but I can draw it. So pursed lips is just there's an inverted V at the union, and there's evidence that it's actually actively splitting on the inside. And then that doesn't mean that I'm going to get rid of the tree. That means they're the things I'm going to assess. I'm trying to think what else I'd be concerned about. I'm concerned about big dead parts. But big dead parts aren't 5 centimetre branches in most cases. Me, a 5 centimetre branch over a sitting area in a childcare centre, I'd be more concerned about.
Soil heaving. I would suggest that Valid little spreadsheet handout of 3 features to be concerned about. It's really useful for that.
The one pager.
I guess all those defects you mentioned, that's not too many trees that have those. So often you wouldn't have many to write about.
That's right. In most cases, a typical report will have, I'd say an average school might have 7 to 8 items on average. Some will have 1, some will have 15. Occasionally you'll get 20 or 30. The most common thing I see is dead trees, and most dead trees are maintenance. Most dead trees are maintenance because dead trees I load test. If I can push it over, it probably shouldn't have stayed. Once I push it over, it's not going to hurt anybody in real terms. So if I can't push it over, we've probably got a year or more before we need to do something. Bigger dead bits are going to start to fall over time. So dead bits over 10 centimetres, I worry about. There has been a fatality with a 10 centimetre 4-inch branch. I think you'd be unlucky to be killed by a 5 centimetre branch. I think you'd have to be really at your luck's end. That's not saying you couldn't. I believe that a 5 centimetre branch coming down tip end onto your skull could do that as a problem. But that's a pretty low number of hits. If you think about how many times you've seen a dead branch on the ground, how many times do you see the dead branch sticking up out of the ground? Pretty rare. So, and I'd have maybe a cavity or two. I certainly wouldn't record a tight junction or an area where there was included bark if there wasn't evidence of some internal cracking, that is those pursed inward lips. If they're a nice round bulldog nose, I don't care. It's, according to Duncan Slater's work, it's almost as strong as a normal junction, and it's going to fail mostly in conditions when nobody's outside. So in most cases, recording that down doesn't achieve a lot for us, except panic people, and then we end up having to then deal with this process of getting rid of things or doing things that the tree doesn't really need. And I see the other side of that. A young arborist here in Sydney recently did a school, assessed it, and it resulted in $52,000 worth of tree work being done in the school. And I look at that and I think, that's probably 100 trees that could have been planted because somebody felt that they had to get rid of 10 millimetre dead branches from a school. And it's interesting. I went to a school the other day, Zach, that was really a great little school, Hollow Vale in the Southern Highlands. And they have a play with sticks rules. You're allowed to play with sticks up to 2 inches or 50 mils in diameter. You're allowed to hit each other with them. You're allowed to play in the bush block. And in all of that, they don't cite a single incident involving a serious injury to do with trees, including leaving the dead sticks for them to play with. And what I found in the school was them using sticks to create forts and do things with creative learning. And they probably learned a whole pile of things about fair and equal play the first time they'd been hit with a stick or they'd hit somebody with a stick. I'm not suggesting that we go and hit kids with sticks for that reason, but there's a great chain of thought, and it's raised in Ball and Ball King's text on risk that talks about learning about failure and risk as a young child. And we've got a whole generation. You're in that generation, Zach. You fell off you couldn't have a Taranaki frame because that was dangerous. When you fell onto soft fall. And you get to the age of 21, 22, and you think you're infallible. And what we found was that let's mollycoddle the kids so they can't hurt themselves actually increased their likelihood of fatality in motor vehicle accidents as they reach driving age, because they thought of the world as soft fall, reset, start again. And I actually work with a childcare centre that has a series of them that are now installing hard fall zones. So that kids do fall over, scrape their knees. So kids do fall over and get cuts. They're not sharp edges, but they're enough that they're going to graze themselves and, go home, and they're going to learn from that process. And I think that, one of the unintended consequences of what we're doing in schools is we're teaching principals, GAs, teachers, and to a certain extent students, they don't ever need to think about trees. And the reality is exactly the opposite. They need to be aware and understand them. And so we still need kids to say, hey, sir, that tree's making a strange sound. Because I looked at the tree today, there's a storm tomorrow, and they end up with that tree with the split in it sitting there for 11 months and, 29 days until I'm back there again. That's madness. So I think we've got to be careful of this, presenting this concept of don't worry, you don't have to think. Yes, you still do have to think. When you walk down the road, you still need to, you can't play Pokemon Go and walk down the street without expecting to trip over. We've got to get away from that mentality. Yes, you need to look right and look left when you cross a zebra crossing. I know it's a zebra crossing, but you still need to check. And yes, I know it's a green walk signal at a thing, but if the car's coming down the road fast, do not assume they're going to stop. We've got to stop allowing the risk to be transferred to everyone else in terms of responsibility. We need to start taking it ourselves. So that's my view on risk, though. And as I said, I understand some people will have a lot more risk-averse approach where they say, look, we can do something, we should do it. The question is, where do you allocate your funds? And that's the hard bit. And that's the one thing I love about quantitative investments, is that it allows me to compare the risk from a set of traffic lights with the risk of a car, with the risk of, and one of the best QTRA students I ever had was a traffic engineer. Because every decision they make about roads is based quantitatively, not qualitatively. Not, oh boy, this looks like this could be a dangerous spot, but this is an area that's had X number of accidents based on X traffic flow, and the effect of putting in a $1.2 million traffic light system will be Y, therefore this is a good decision. That's exactly how they make decisions. As arborists, we like, and that's the dilemma I have with them, we like yellow, slippery and wet. Yep, this risk of this tree, it's yellow. And we use yellow, slippery and wet, we'd stop using high, medium and low. That is, they're just as meaningful. I don't know what you mean when you say it's a low risk or it's a high risk. And that's the problem I have with those terms. Not that you can't benchmark that for me, and Nissa has done that in his report, but I need to know what that low means. Low compared with what? Well, compared with the average tree, with the average risks that we take in society, trees are extremely low. We should be inspecting them. Nissa, you had a question, and then we need to call it the day.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I don't know if you've said before about doing risk assessments at different times of the year for the same school. how does that work with the QTRA being an annualized risk assessment?
Oh, look, I do an annualized risk in a school, and then I can say quite happily, the reason you'll do the next inspection is in a year is because the department's demanded it, not because I've told you to. In most cases, I would say don't bother doing a risk assessment again for 5 years or 10 years. I've got clients on 10 yearly inspections. Just, once every 5 or 10 years, let me come and have a look and just make sure that nothing's developed. But if there's been failures on your property or nearby, take the time to go out and look up. Have a look at your tree. Look for signs of cracking, movement, bits that are broken out. And if you've got a concern, raise it with your tree risk expert. So different times of the year, yeah, look, I am just in that process of struggling with the government at the moment over this very issue. My wish would be that, it'd be plus or minus 3 months in a year. Why? Because things like sporocarps can change. So, you can go to a school and you can see armillaria that is out fruiting a month and a half ago. You won't see it in a month's time. You look at a deciduous tree. I just did the Southern Highlands last week. Southern Highlands has lots of deciduous trees. Who was the moron, me, who put me down there when it's got no leaves on? It is so much harder to do. It's not that you can't do it, it's just harder to do it. So, if I had my choice for that area, I would say, look, Southern Highlands, 3 months of the year, I wouldn't want to be there. That's once leaf fall starts onwards. A lot easier looking at trees when they've got leaves on them. And I think cycling things around, this annual risk, if the risk is 1 in a million, do you think the risk is going to change rapidly? There's a good question for you. If the average risk from the average tree sits at about of death to a person is about 1 in 10 million, how quickly do you think that's going to change on average for most trees?
Probably a long time unless there's a significant event.
Yeah, slowly. And the things that we're saying aren't going to be slow are cracking, shifting in the ground, decay organisms. We could put Agrionomy spinicolis, the decay longicorn or the Ponciana longicorn in there. It can cause rapid loss of tissue. But hell, almost everything else is slow, except for a storm event. And I don't know when the storm event's going to hit. When I say a storm event, I'm not talking about a thunderstorm. I'm talking generally microbursts. That is, 1 in every 10 storms is going to do some damage in a very localized area. If I get 20 storms or 30 storms in Sydney this year that are bad, that means we might have, 10 or 12 square kilometres of Sydney, and almost nothing area affected by microbursts. And I don't know where they're going to hit. If I did, I'd park my car there. It's over-insured. It's a piece of crap. Let it get a tree fall on it and I'll claim. I don't know how to do that. So it's the reality is for us, if the risk is 1 in a million now, the likelihood there's going to be 1 in a million next year is almost 100%. And 1 in 100%, and 100%, 100%. So, the trees that I want to see more often are the trees that are sitting in 1 in 20,000 and 1 in 50,000. And I see them so rarely in suburbia that I almost have tingles when I do see them. Okay? They're just not the norm. The great one, if you've ever been to Sydney or you get to Sydney, Hambleton Cottage. Peter, you remember Hambleton Cottage?
Yeah.
The big Camphilara with Ryan Darrington standing in it with his arms out in the cavity.
Mm.
We don't see that sort of thing in society. And so we lose, as arborists, we lose that ability to say, wow, yeah, that's Camphilara. It's got a cavity. The cavity's getting close to 50%. Boy, that's unfortunate. It's going to take another 100 or 200 years before I've got a problem. I'm not going to live long enough. When we don't get to see that, we lose that sort of thing. We see the world through a very sterile arboricultural set of eyes. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I think is a great exercise for you to do is go to the bush and find some completely screwed trees that you are fairly sure is going to fail in the next year. Okay, can't be actively failing, so no rocking the ground, no actively splitting, but stuffed knackered tree that you think is going to fall in the next, leaning, you know, everything's wrong with it. It's got a banana bend in it. It's got a cavity in it. Take some photographs, give me the GIS location, send me $100. I'll give you 10 to 1 odds that you're going to lose. It'll still be there in a year's time. And it's just the nature of the beast. We'll ever tend to overestimate the level of risk. And my learning one was the oak tree on the main drive at University of Western Sydney. It got hit in the 2001 microburst, badly damaged. It had everything wrong with it. It was just a classic example. 95% decay. It had banana split in it. It had 2 hazard beams in it. It was just horrible. And every year we'd take a new cohort of students out and say, how likely is this to fail? And all of them said it wouldn't survive the year. Eventually got taken down because it was considered to be an unacceptable risk to have when the primary target was the guy mowing the lawn. He was the highest risk. When was that tree fail? But it didn't fail in 147 kilometre-hour winds. It just partially failed. In other words, on a normal rainy, wet day, it's probably not going to have any effect. That poor mowing guy is probably sitting in a 1 in 10 million risk. And yet the tree was removed. And that's because we want to take that away. We don't want to have anyone be able to say, we've got this wrong term that we use, and that's the word defect. Defect doesn't address the question of adequacy. Yep, there's a hollow. It's irrelevant. There's an overextended branch. It's irrelevant. The question is, has the tree adequately dealt with it? If the tree is healthy, on the vast percentages of the cases, the tree's dealing with it okay.